Good morning, good afternoon, and good day. Welcome to today's webinar on the Tech-Savvy CFO, Business Agility Starts in the Cloud. My name is Vijay Ramakrishnan, and I am from Intact, a provider of best-in-class cloud ERP software. And we're going to be covering some interesting ground today at the intersection of finance and technology. CFOs and their teams in high-growth organizations are being called on to be more agile today than they have been before. And that's because the organizations that they're helping to guide are being agile at the market level. And they're being agile at the market level by using enabling technologies. And what we want to talk to you about today is taking those same technological forces that are reshaping markets and thinking about those technologies and applying them internally at the organization level so that finance can be more agile as well in the cause of business agility. And the specific technology we're going to focus on today is the cloud. Now, before we get into the heart of today's session, I want to do quick introductions. As I said, my name is Vijay Ramakrishnan. I am with Intact, a provider of best-in-class cloud ERP software. And one of the great things about what I do at Intact is speak with finance leaders and finance teams on a day-in and day-out basis to understand how they're applying technology. And I'll be sharing some perspectives along the way here about Intact and how we're helping our customers who are CFOs and finance organizations. But today's featured speaker is Cindy Jutras, who's the president of Mint Jutras, and Cindy will be getting on the presentation shortly. I'm really excited to have her on today's webinar because she's really an expert in looking at the impact of enterprise applications on business performance. And in the last 10 years, she spent a lot of her time benchmarking the performance of technologies and software solutions and how those technologies and software solutions translate into business benefits. So she's got some deep perspectives on how organizations are applying technologies. And today she's going to share with you those perspectives around the theme of agility and around cloud technologies. Before I hand the floor over to her, I want to share with you briefly some housekeeping details. We've had some questions come in already about materials from the webinar, and so I wanted to point out that we will be sending a copy of the presentation and a recording of this webinar in follow-up emails after the event. But I also want to encourage you to ask those questions. You've got some very deep expertise in the form of Cindy's experience and analysis and insights. I encourage you to take advantage of that and send your questions our way during the course of the webinar. And we've got both the chat box and the Q&A box on this console available to you to ask those questions. So with those housekeeping details out of the way, let's get to the heart of today's session. And let's start talking about business agility and how you can leverage the cloud for business agility. And I'd like to hand over the presentation now to Cindy Jutras, who is the president of Mint Jutras. And Cindy, as I hand this presentation over to you, I think let's start with the question of agility and bring it back to finance. And let's start the session with the question of, why is agility important to finance? So with that, Cindy, the floor is yours.
Well, thanks, VJ. Happy to be here. Welcome, everyone on the call. In answer to that question, I don't think anyone today would argue with the fact that things are changing very rapidly today. Change has always been a part of our lives, but never so much as it is today. So that's the number one reason that agility is so important, and in particular to finance today, much of that change is being driven today by technology and technology advances. And quite frankly, the Internet has really leveled the playing field. It used to be the case where only very large companies could deal on the global front and establish a global brand, but today that's all changed. Even small to mid-sized companies can take that opportunity and take advantage of opportunities that are occurring today as new emerging economies are appearing, creating new opportunity that you never had the ability to take advantage of before. But with that opportunity comes new challenges. So, obviously, if you can, as a small to mid-sized company, if you can take advantage of that opportunity, so can your competition, and your competition is arising from sources that you never thought would have been possible just a few short years ago today. So that presents a lot of potential for disruption. It also impacts your business right down to the very business model. As the business models new business models are being introduced, obviously we're getting to the point where there's much more of a subscription economy, and with that comes new ways of invoicing, accounting for business, and that's why the chief financial officers get hammered by a whole variety of different directions. Not only the business model, business processes change, but also those new regulations. And as this subscription economy sort of blossoms, for example, the merger of ACS 606 and IFRS 15 is the classic example of that, introducing new regulatory requirements, particularly around recurring revenue. So let's take a little deeper view on the technology front. Today we live in a digital world. Whether we like it or not, whether we appreciate it or not, the millennials were born into this digital world, but even us baby boomers are sort of succumbing to the being drawn in by that siren call of digital communication, collaboration. 84% of the companies that I've surveyed believe digital technologies have the potential of fundamentally changing the way we do business. So with that, digital technologies become truly transformative, and that's the source of a lot of this potential for disruption. Now, before I go any further, let me tell you where that 84% came from. As BJ mentioned, for the past 10 years, I've been benchmarking how enterprise applications impact the business, and I conduct an annual enterprise solution study. This year, the 2016 Enterprise Solution Study gathered about 525 responses. They were from companies of all sizes. As you can see down in the lower right-hand corner, it's quite evenly distributed across small, lower mid, upper mid, and large enterprises, and that breakdown is based on company revenues. Every year we look at goals, challenges, the status of enterprise applications, and the performance of those implementations. So many of the questions I ask are similar from year to year so that we can track trends and changes. And quite frankly, I've been capturing trends on cloud and software as a service, or SaaS, for all of those 10 years. And we've seen things change quite dramatically over that past 10 years. Back when I first started asking these SaaS and cloud questions, I used to call ERP, or the software that runs the business, including accounting applications and that software that keeps track of the system of record of your business, I used to call that the last bastion of resistance to SaaS. That has changed dramatically over the years. So while I've been following those trends, this year I also started inserting questions about digital technologies and generally the digital preparedness of companies that take the survey. And we've got some quite interesting responses. Now, one of the things I ask is about this disruption. You notice I mentioned before that all this change was also introducing the potential for business disruption. And in asking this question, I used examples like Uber disrupting the taxi industry and Airbnb disrupting the hospitality industry, Netflix and iTunes disrupting the entertainment industry. As you can see, there aren't too many people that think there's no risk at all, but even a smaller percentage think that the risk is high or high and imminent. I will point out, so you see that big bubble in the middle where there's in general, people think of the risk as being low to medium, but I would question whether the taxi industry would have thought there was no risk or a low risk right before Uber came on the scene, or the hospitality industry and Airbnb came on the scene. When this disruption occurs, it can happen very quickly. So I would say that some of you that might think today you're at low risk may be underestimating that risk. And even a medium risk can come on very, very quickly. But where will this disruption come from? In the high-tech industry, where technologies play a huge role, you have new and innovative products. And those kind of new and innovative products also come on the scene fairly quickly, and that's where a lot of the change and a lot of the disruption is occurring. But even more of a percentage of people responding think that new ways of selling or pricing existing products may cause that disruption. Think about, the manufacturer of air compressors charging for compressed air versus the equipment that compresses the air, or a water filter company charging for the gallons of water that's filtered versus the actual product. Think of those kinds of things, not a new product, but a new way of subscribing perhaps, or billing or pricing existing services that are associated with a physical product. And here you get into that concept of the subscription economy, impacting companies, even the companies that are dealing with physical products. Now, there's good news and bad news about those subscriptions. The good news is there's a lot more stickiness to the company, to the customer, to the company, and more recurring revenue. The bad news is you'll have to predict and recognize the revenue differently, including new rules and regulations. Now, a small percentage are worried about entirely new business models like Uber and Airbnb, but again, I want to remind you that had we asked the taxi industry 5 years ago, or whenever, right before Uber came out on the scene, they probably would have been a small percentage saying they were at risk for those entirely new business models. What makes it even more unpredictable is when you consider that 1 in 3 companies think that it's going to be a combination of the above. So that makes it a lot harder to predict. So let's just recap what we've talked about today and this digital imperative and these digital technologies. The Internet does level the playing field and allows even small to mid-sized businesses to take advantage of opportunities that never would have been available to them a few short years ago. But with that comes new competitive threats and competition coming from places, what would have been the most unlikely sources a few years ago. At the same time, you get increasingly demanding customers, and all of this really means that you can't wing it anymore. You need the right tools and technology to make things happen and to effectively compete.
Cindy, if I may have a question, actually. We do have a Q&A box and a chat box here for questions in the audience. The question for you is, in terms of the risk of disruption, is there a relationship to industry or size of company? Or you've also shared some perspectives that it can happen anywhere.
It can. I think that there are certain industries that probably have seen more disruption. I would think that instead of answering the question, are there industries that are most susceptible, I don't know that we can answer that today. I don't think it's based on size of company, but I do think that there are probably some that are a little more protected than others, and those that are most protective might be those that are already purely a professional service kind of environment. Yes, there's more collaboration. Yes, there's the need to provide new, different kinds of services, but that's probably not quite as disruptive as brand new ways of doing business. So that's a small percentage of companies today, Vijay, so I would say that there are very few that are somewhat immune to that.
That's been our experience as well, Cindy, just in terms of the customers we speak with. I mean, it's customers really in all industries that are being pressured to have, be more agile because of these technology forces. And of course, we'll talk about the impacts on finance a little bit later in the session, but that's pretty consistent with what we're seeing as well.
And I think that does lead into this next slide where, remember I just said you can't wing it today. You need the tools and the technologies, and these new revenue recognition rules are the perfect example of why you need those tools and technologies, and also an example of the service industries that may not have the very high risk of complete disruption, still having to deal with these kinds of issues, because in a service environment and a contract environment, still you're dealing with somewhat of that recurring revenue and contracts that may span when before and after when these new rules and regulations come into play. And as you can see, that you might have been reading or trying to read that as I talk at you, that first quote, which comes from FASB ASC regulations, and if you tried reading it, it sounds a little like gobbledygook. It's not real clear what this is saying. It's talking about an entity should recognize revenue not only to depict the transfer of goods or services, but in the amount that reflects the consideration to which the entity expects to be entitled in exchange of those goods or services. I mean, gee, could you be a little more cryptic in that? I mean, what it boils down to is revenue is no longer recognized on cash receipt, but instead on the delivery of performance of obligations or satisfaction of those obligations. The bottom line is these changes aren't really intuitive. And if you're recognizing and managing revenue today by spreadsheets, all I can say is good luck, because you're in for some real hard times in terms of the rules and requirements that you'll be faced with going forward.
So Cindy, I mean, these revenue recognition rules, these are going to be changes that a lot of our customers are thinking about because, the ASC 606 is, going to apply across industries. And so you've talked about regulatory change as, something that could drive the need to be more agile in finance. You've talked about, technology and disruption and business model change as, something that could drive the need for agility as well. And so the next question naturally becomes, talked about the need for agility, what about the cloud and, using the cloud for finance to become more agile? So take us through that.
Yeah, and I think you ask a real good question in that what role does the cloud play in agility? I think in many ways, I view cloud truly as an enabler. It's an enabler of growth because with that, and fortunately, as an enabler of growth, it also enables better communication, better collaboration. But one of the reasons it's such an enabler of growth is think about how you may grow into new locations, into new sites, into new geographies, into new markets. And with the cloud, there's no capital expenditure required. There's no need to build out a data center. There's no need for hardware or beyond the devices you're using to communicate, which you need anyway. No hardware and no huge information technology or IT staff needed in these new locations, which may be in new countries, and these countries may be in emerging economies where that IT talent is quite rare today.
So Cindy, just to clarify and drive the point home, we're talking about ERP systems, the kinds of systems of record and financial systems of record that you referred to earlier that really become the source, data with which, finance can help run the business on a transactional basis. And so when you're talking about cloud as an enabler here, the contrast that you're making is, in the research that you've done, on-premises ERP versus cloud ERP. Is that right?
It is on-premise versus cloud, but it goes a little deeper than that, Vijay, because in one respect, you can have an on-premise solution that is accessed over the cloud. All you need for that is web enablement, and that will give you some of these benefits. Obviously, if you're still running on-premise, you do need capital expenditure. You may need a data center. You may need IT staff. Where you start to get more benefits and really this drives it home is when you get software as a service. And software as a service takes that cloud and really takes it to the next level of benefit. And, I've been asking for almost a decade now, what is the appeal of a software as a service? And, I've kind of filled in the cloud here with some of the appeals of a true SaaS environment, which I think brings you more value than a pure web enablement and a cloud solution. The first is cost considerations. The second is cost and effort of upgrades with less disruption because the SaaS solution provider relieves you of that burden of that upgrade. And in fact, as I mentioned, I've been asking about the appeal of SaaS for many years now. Just this past year, that particular one, in particular, the cost and effort of upgrades with less disruption grew from 39% of my survey respondents checked the box on that in 2015, and that rose to 57% in 2016. So just in 1 year, we're starting to see more of a value associated with SaaS than we've seen before. The next one, and part of the reason it's highlighted there, is because there's more innovation with what we call a multi-tenant SaaS solution. Those SaaS solution providers only have to deal with one line of code. They don't have to be going back and fixing bugs and maintaining different versions of the same software. And that used to be undervalued and overlooked, but that's become more valuable in the eyes of my survey response. That went from 29% to 41% this year. And then these others, ease of remote access. How many of you on the call have employees that don't live in an office? They may be remote locations because you have remote locations or because they don't work in a traditional office anymore. And then there's also the ease of bringing up those new locations as you grow. Now, one other area that I also want to point out is in terms of security and business continuity. For many years, if I ask what the concerns are for SaaS, security is at the top of the list. It's still at the top of the list today. There's nothing wrong with that because I feel everyone needs to be worried about security today. I just happen to think that if you're in a secure SaaS environment, you have better security today than if you're, particularly if you're a small to mid-sized company that doesn't have IT security experts on board. Trust me, those SaaS solution providers, I'm sure you do at Intact, those SaaS solution providers have those kind of security assets and expertise in-house and can better secure your environment and provide business continuity. What if an earthquake like just happened in Italy happened? What if Hurricane Katrina came along and ripped the roof off your building? Would you be able to access your systems safely and securely the next day? I talked with a food manufacturer right outside of New Orleans that was running a SaaS solution when Katrina hit, and Katrina ripped their roof off their building. They couldn't produce product, but they could get on the phone and they could get on the system and be active in collecting accounts receivable the very next day after the skies cleared.
Yeah, and Cindy, I mean, I think the points you make here about SaaS, and another way that people think about SaaS is a true multi-tenant cloud solution. I think these are important points, and these are important points that relate back to agility, to continuity, to having more innovation. And Intact is a multi-tenant cloud provider or a SaaS ERP provider. And what we find is that when we talk to our customers about the differences between on-premises ERP and taking that on-premises ERP and just hosting it versus, what we do in terms of doing, SaaS ERP, what you call SaaS ERP, which is a multi-tenant architecture, it's an important distinction to understand because that distinction, it's an architectural distinction, it's a technology distinction, but it has an impact on the business, and it has an impact on, being agile, and those are the things that we're beginning to have more and more conversations about because, at one level, it's about being more efficient with, your IT costs, and those are the things that people readily get about the cloud, but there's more to the cloud than just, the reduction in IT costs, and you get that additional benefits of the cloud when you think about SaaS ERP and when you think about multi-tenant cloud ERP. And Intact is a multi-tenant cloud solution. And so one of the things that customers really appreciate about Intact being a multi-tenant cloud solution is that we make the software upgrades transparent to our customers. So the upgrades are opt-in. There's no work in terms of customizing the solution or checking your scripts or those kinds of things. And the benefit of that is that in order to take advantage of new capabilities, there's not, that need to put in that extra investment. But then the other advantage is, as a provider, because we have a multi-tenant cloud architecture, and you alluded to this earlier on, we don't have to focus our R&D resources on testing, validating, and creating our application on multiple operating systems or multiple sets of hardware. We make all of that completely transparent to our customers by doing it all on a single platform that, again, we deliver as a service. And the benefit of that to our customers is that we can focus more of our R&D resources on the innovation piece. And so we're able to deliver multiple updates within a year, in contrast to the older days, of on-premises architectures where, the updates were less frequent, and where there may have been a cost that customers needed to incur to even take advantage of those updates. And so this is an architectural issue, but it has a very direct bearing on some of the agility topics we talked about earlier, and it comes up in this notion of access to innovation, right? And so as a company grows, their needs are going to change. Can they have the capabilities, from their ERP system to support business change? Can they have the capabilities from their ERP system to support regulatory change? And you've mentioned this a few times, and we've talked about it, but innovation is important for both reasons: business agility, as well as the need to address regulatory changes. And we talked about the most significant accounting changes in a decade, and they're about to hit organizations in all industries. The AICPA has set up over a dozen working groups that focus on the impact of ASC 606, and there's some fundamental accounting changes, right? And these kinds of accounting changes mean that the way that you produce and the numbers that are going to be your income statement and your balance sheets, they're going to get calculated in a fundamentally different way. And in as much as your ERP system hasn't evolved to take advantage, to be able to support these new regulations, that becomes a burden on finance. That becomes a burden on having to handle all of that regulatory change outside the system in the context of spreadsheets. And because we are a SaaS provider, a multi-tenant cloud ERP provider, Intact can innovate and get ahead and meet this need for agility at the regulatory level for our customers. And so what we've been able to do is right within the, right within our software solution, provide the ability to handle both accounting treatments, both the current guidelines and the new guidelines. And we delivered that in one of our quarterly releases back in May. And so this is an example of, helping our customers get ahead of these changes, be agile in the face of this regulatory change by delivering the automation to do dual reporting, by delivering the automation to look at all of your transactions and your contracts and apply both the current and the new revenue recognition rules simultaneously. So by taking an approach from an architecture perspective of being a multi-tenant cloud ERP solution, of being a SaaS ERP solution, we're able to deliver much faster innovations that help our customers be more agile that they really need in this type of environment. So talked about agility, we've talked about the cloud, Cindy, and we've talked about the difference of SaaS and multi-tenant cloud and being more agile. Here, I want to turn it back to you at this point, and is being a SaaS solution above and beyond being a cloud solution enough, or are there more things that people should be thinking about in order to get the kinds of capabilities that they need to be agile?
Well, Vijay, I think you've brought up some really good points here, and before I specifically answer that question, let me pose another question to the audience: is think about the alternative. Think about, if you happen to be on an on-premise solution, maybe you're a few releases behind, which is not that uncommon. You're faced with these kind of regulatory changes which can be disruptive enough in of themselves, but then you also have to go through a major upgrade or potentially a re-implementation because you're so far behind that it makes more sense to do that as opposed to just upgrade in place. And think about where that leaves you in terms of having to deal with all of this. That's also a good lead-in to answer your question, is that does the cloud, provide you all the answers? I would say no. If the solution itself doesn't meet your needs, then putting it in the cloud isn't going to magically meet your needs. If it doesn't make you agile now, putting it in the cloud will help, but it doesn't magically make you agile. Basically, what I'm saying is it's not just any SaaS solution. It better be the right SaaS solution that meets your specific needs. And I'll give you one example. The example deals with this unprecedented growth opportunity and the fact that the Internet has leveled the playing field. It's gotten to the point where, even small companies, and remember, small was the size of company was based on revenues. Small here are companies with revenues under $25 million. On average, they have 3 operating locations. What happens when one or more of those operating locations is outside of the country? You've got multinational issues to deal with, multiple legal entities. If your solution doesn't already handle that, then putting it in the cloud isn't solving that problem. What kind of hoops do you jump through today to get consolidated financials? If you're jumping through hoops, if you're doing it offline, if you're still reliant on spreadsheets, then it doesn't solve. Putting it in the cloud doesn't make that go away. So you need that solution that can handle that, and also support what today have become very dominant, and that is corporate standards. In the past, every single one of those blocks that you're seeing down there, from small to lower mid, upper mid, and the larger companies, in the past, those might have been left to their own devices to have their own operating solutions. Today, that's the thing of the past. Today, companies, whether you're small, mid-size, or large, tend to develop corporate standards. And in doing that, putting them in the cloud and the SaaS solution helps you enforce those corporate standards, but if those solutions don't have the architecture and the management reporting and the ability to consolidate, eliminate, and support those multiple legal entities, you've just got a nightmare on your hands.
Cindy, that's an interesting point that you just made. I mean, give us a few more examples of that. I mean, what are some of the things you don't want to deal with or you don't want to have to face that are going to hold you back from being more agile, if you will, in terms of, you know, what's the right solution, what's the wrong solution here?
Oh, well, probably the perfect example that any CFO on a call will relate to is if in the past or even today, if you have your organizational structure buried in your chart of accounts, then good luck if you have to reorganize, because you know that that's the last thing you ever want to change. You know, if you're a manufacturing company, close second to that is your part and item numbers, but you don't want to have to be changing your chart of accounts structure. But if your organizational structure is buried in that chart of accounts, then you're limited in how you can reflect the organizational structure you need as you expand, grow, go into multinational sites, multiple legal entities. The other thing that comes to mind is many solutions in the past have been what I would call very rigid, monolithic structures. That means when you change, I mean, the good news is everything's integrated. The bad news is when you have to make a change, everything, every department, every piece of software, everything in the company all has to march forward together. So if you're dealing with a monolithic, rigid structure, particularly if your chart of accounts is where you've defined your organizational structure, you've got some real issues some hurdles to overcome.
That's interesting, Cindy. I mean, you called out three things. You called out, you know, having an architecture that, you know, allows you to get to multiple locations and allows you to be global. You've called out, you know, having an architecture that is, you know, much more of what you label a loosely coupled architecture. So you have an ERP system, you know, that's loosely coupled. It can work better with other applications. And you've called out some interesting points about chart of accounts and being tied to your chart of accounts and how that might be limiting. It's interesting that you say that because a lot of growth companies, you know, that we speak with, you know, are facing exactly those issues. And, you know, as they're trying to be more agile, you know, they're looking to be more agile in terms of, you know, being global. They're looking to be more agile in terms of, you know, having a ERP system, a system of record that works well with new applications that they're either bringing on or, you know, like a CRM application, best-in-class CRM application like Salesforce, or that they're building in-house. They're looking to be more agile in terms of how we get information out of the system. And so I think those are some interesting things that we've seen. And I want to just provide a deeper look into how intact, you know, we've thought about agility in those contexts that you've raised, and this notion of expanding into multiple locations and the data that you shared there. It's important to have the flexibility, you know, to be able to quickly add locations. That's certainly important. But the interesting thing that you said is that it's also important to have some consistency and to have, you know, some standards. And so in order to be able to do that, you need to have, you know, the SaaS ERP architecture that allows you to turn on new locations. But that's not enough. You need also to have a data model where you can have shared charts of accounts if that's what's appropriate, different charts of accounts if that's what the business dictates, where you can have, shared operational definitions like departments, customers, vendors, projects, and those kinds of things. And so we've really worked hard at Intact to bake all of that into the architecture, because the organizations that are going global need to have visibility into financial and operational reporting across locations. They need to have visibility at the department level across locations, but they want to have the flexibility as well. And so, that's why, in thinking about what's going on in the business today in agility, many companies that are looking for more agility in the finance organization appreciate is this notion of having a multi-entity architecture that's built for that. You also mentioned this notion of being, a monolithic application as a system of record, or a set of applications versus loosely coupled. Say a little bit more about that and what your perspectives are.
Sure. It used to be a question, everyone's heard the age-old question of integrated suite versus best of breed. And it used to be a pretty clear trade-off. You either got integration embedded within, or you got more functionality. Well, there's good news on both fronts here in that, the only downside is the decision isn't quite so black and white anymore, but new architectures, new technologies, make new integration capabilities, make it much easier to what I would call loosely coupled, as opposed to a more monolithic, call it tightly integrated, but the downside of it is the monolithic. The advantage of that and where it came from were those tightly integrated suites that shared a single database. They were tightly integrated. The good news was everything moved forward together. The bad news was it was all or nothing. Everything had to move forward together. So, if the finance department needed to move forward because of the ACS 606 regulations, but the rest of the company wasn't ready to move forward, too bad, because everyone had to move forward together. And it also increased the likelihood of invasive customization, because if you weren't ready to move forward and you had to solve the problem, you had to find a way of doing it. On the loosely coupled side, let's face it, integration isn't a given, but with the right technology and the right integration capabilities, it can have the same level of seamless integration that you always got with the monolithic structure, but you eliminate any of the redundancy and synchronization required because you had, say, a customer in two different systems, or a part or a chart of accounts in two different systems. And the good news is you can move, different parts can move forward as necessary. And it gets into a world of what I would call extension of a system as opposed to customization of a system. So in this case, with the right technology, the right architecture, you can really answer the question of where do you want to move to where the functionality is the strongest, and is integration seamless? The answer can be all good news, all positive, with the right architecture and the right approach.
Yeah, these are great points, Cindy, and I think that one of the things, so Intact was founded day one as a multi-tenant cloud ERP solution. And when Intact was founded, one of the huge opportunities that the founders saw in the cloud was this notion of being able to move towards more loosely coupled architectures. And so that provided a huge opportunity to deliver value to finance and deliver value to customers, because what it opened up for Intact was the ability to provide deep functionality for finance And we knew that this was going to be important to support agility for all the reasons that we talked about. But what we also knew was that, finance and the financial system of record doesn't exist in a vacuum. And so the very first release of Intact came out with a set of cloud and web integrations. What you call loosely coupled architectures, we call, a best-in-class approach. And so by building Intact, as, thinking about it in terms of this loosely coupled approach, what we've been able to do is we've been able to focus innovation, capability on finance, and we've been able to also take advantage of this loosely coupled approach so that, finance can get deep functionality and continue to get deep functionality, but use the application with other best-in-class applications that provide really deep functionality as well. And so that's a trend that we've definitely taken advantage of. I want to get to the third point that you made, which was around being agile around the use of information and what you need out of your ERP system or financial system of record for that. So if you could give us your perspective on that, we can close on that topic.
Sure, and I mentioned before that you really need the right tools and technologies, and I think that we have made a lot of progress along those lines. But one of the questions I asked in my survey was what tools were used to monitor, plan, and predict corporate performance. This is where, really for the CFO, the rubber meets the road. While we've made some progress in terms of financial reporting, operational reporting, even specific financial planning and budgeting applications, I have to point out, look at what is number 2. Spreadsheets used in conjunction with these other tools is just a little bit lagging behind financial reporting. That means we're still very dependent on these spreadsheets. And we have some other evidence of that as well. We also asked, to what extent are these activities performed and managed digitally? And we're talking about primarily planning activities, financial planning and budgeting, demand planning, sales and operations planning. You can read them. And I know we're getting kind of tight on time, so I'm going to go fairly quickly here, but you'll notice, in general, a relatively small percentage of those activities are performed and managed digitally. And those 2 middle columns still have spreadsheets as a key element of how we're doing these and performing these activities and managing them. And God forbid you've got a small percentage that is still trying to do it with paper and manual efforts. As a result of this, you have only a small percentage that have a completely digital operational and transactional system of record of the business. Now, that first column means it's completely digital, and the only time you touch that is for approvals or for exceptions. What's more likely to happen is that you have it as a digital system of record. You have it in your accounting solution or in your ERP, but you had to do something manual to get it in there. And then, still a big percentage rely predominantly on paper along with digital, and still that small percentage that have paper and manual. So we still have a long way to go in terms of making sure that we're digitally prepared.
Cindy, that's some very interesting data. And, the thing is that in the context of agility, the use of spreadsheets, organizations, what we find is organizations are forced into using spreadsheets because the ERP, the system of record, can't provide the agility in terms of looking at global information, or provide the agility in terms of the management reporting that finance is expected to produce, or provide the agility in terms of the operational reporting that finance is expected to produce in a changing business environment. And so, what we've done to enable that level of agility in terms of access to information is we've completely, rethought, the architecture for a system of record and capturing and reporting on information. And it's interesting, had a question come in from the audience here, which is, how does Intact work for allowing standardized reporting of globally diverse GLs and entities? And it's a great question because it pertains to the data that you just provided, and it talks to kind of the kinds of information that's needed. And to answer that question, what we've done at Intact to support that kind of agility is provide a dimensional GL, right? And so what that means and what that looks like is that, sure, we have, our core account codes and account numbers that, as you store transactions, as you store budgets, as you store operational measures, they get associated with core accounts. But beyond that, we've taken the notion of, business drivers and context, and we've taken that out of the chart of accounts to provide more agility. And in real time, we tag all of that information that's going into GL with business context, things like which customer, which product, which location, that particular data is associated with. And by being able to capture this information in a different way, where we can provide some consistency and flexibility, that may not be possible with traditional charts of accounts architectures, what we're able to do is deliver the business insights that are really needed for that kind of agility. So it's not just the financial reporting, which is job number one, of an ERP system, but beyond that, because of, the need for business agility, is that same architecture can deliver those financial metrics in a business context for the management reporting that's essential. It can deliver those operational insights and those management insights in the form of visualizations, but also provide drill down back into, the GL, which is so important for finance to know that these numbers, the management reporting numbers, are the same numbers that are driving, the financial reporting numbers that are auditable and accurate. And so, the notion of being more agile with information, the notion of being more agile with your systems and having a best-in-class approach, the notion of being more agile and being able to support, global operations, those are all the things that we've put into our cloud solution really to make it the right cloud solution to enable agility. And so in closing the webinar, Cindy, I wanted to hand it back to you and have you summarize your thoughts on agility in the cloud.
Well, I think you've handed it over at an optimal point, because I think you helped make the case, BJ, that agility is paramount. Technology can drive the change, but you need to have those digital technologies that helps you transform. The internet levels the playing field, but the same solutions that got you where you are today may, in fact, not get you where you need to go. There are new markets out there. There are new business models out there, which means there are new ways of accounting, new ways of reporting, new ways of recognizing revenue, and as a result of that, there are new regulatory requirements. Cloud can serve as both an enabler. SaaS can get you further, but you need the right solution in the cloud in order to take that final mile.
Great. Thank you so much, Cindy. Thank you for sharing your perspectives and your data, from your benchmarks and your survey as well. We've had a number of questions. Some of them have been questions about Intact, and we will follow up with each of you individually who have asked these questions, and get those answered one-on-one for you. I'll leave you with a few additional resources. We have other webinars available for you. More information about customers and examples. We had a couple of questions come in from the audience about examples in specific industries of companies leveraging cloud ERP. Those are available on our website as well. And so with that, I want to, on behalf of Cindy Jutras and Mint Jutras, and on behalf of Intact, I wanted to thank all of you for joining us today and getting some more insights on agility and how cloud can enable that agility. And we hope to speak with you again very soon. Thank you very much.